As a child, my mother and I would move around a lot. Her job required it. I didn't have much of a say in the matter. In 1997, we moved to Edinburgh, to a flat just off the Royal Mile. I wondered why it was called the Royal Mile. My mother told me to stop being stupid, and she pointed to the castle. I still wasn't too sure, but I decided it might be best not to hassle her anymore. I remember that year as the year that Princess Diana died, and the year that I met Walter. He lived in the flat some years ago, but choked on a piece of tripe whilst watching the lunar landing. I remember thinking that tripe was some sort of sea monster. It turns out that it wasn't. He hated my cat. He believed the cats were too big for their boots. My cat responded to this by pointing his anus in Walter's direction. I couldn't help thinking that it looked a lot like my belly button. I kept this to myself. His favourite animal was the sloth, 3-toed, not 2. He said this was because they had a haircut like the Beatles, and they were always smiling. One night we made a fort out of sheets in my room, and he told me some ghost stories. It's kind of hard to be scared by those stories when they're being told to you by a middle-aged ghost. I pretended I was anyway. When I told my mother about Walter, she didn't believe me. She just assumed he was an imaginary friend I'd come up with to keep myself company. I was a scout, and he would sometimes try to help me practice my knots. He wasn't very good, and he'd usually end up frustrated and tangled in the rope. On the way home from school, I tripped and landed on a smashed bottle of iron brew. I thought it was okay. That was until I noticed the blood. I burst into tears and I ran home. Walter told me that if you haven't got any scars, then you haven't lived your life, and proceeded to show me a collection of his. There was one on his elbow from when he cycled into a barbed wire fence, one on his knee from when a postcard stand fell on him, and one on his neck from when he had chicken pox and he picked at a pock. These stories made me feel a little better. Mother and I had to move around a year later. I went back to that flat once. I just stood outside wondering how he was, and hoping that he wasn't being tormented by some cat that was too big for his boots.